Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thriving Thursdays. I'm Carla. I'm the founder and coach at Vida Canvas, a life and career coaching community. And I'm launching a new series called Thriving Thursdays as a forum to share ideas on better living, on career empowerment. And so I'm really excited to welcome you to my first episode. So, earlier this week, I shared a story with my email community where I talked about an interesting reflection moment that I had earlier this week. You've probably heard of Tony Robbins, right? He calls himself the nation's top life and business strategist. He's an author, he's a coach, he's worked with Princess Diana, he's worked with Mother Teresa. I mean, he's a big deal. And so, as someone that's launching her own coaching business, I wanted to learn from the best. I wanted to learn more about the life of this man. And so my husband and I decided to watch a documentary on Netflix called I Am Not Your Guru that follows Tony Robbins over the course of one of his 6-day big life events. I think it's called Date with Destiny. And it's one of those events that happens in a big, hotel conference room, and there's thousands of people. And the first 30 minutes were really great. I learned a few interesting things about Tony Robbins. I learned that before every event of this type, at least, or at least in this event, he plunges himself into icy cold water in order to get the blood flowing, get excited, get, that energy going for his event. Great. Good idea. I don't know that I do it, but good for him. He also clearly cares about his audience, in the way that he planned minute by minute of his event. Also great. And I also admired the way that he really coached beyond the surface, the way that he challenged his audience members, who you can consider his clients, to really dig deeply, and he really coached on deeper issues than what the problems were at face value that the clients or the audience members were bringing up. So I thought, all that is great. But then he did something that really stopped me in my tracks a little bit and actually made me turn off the documentary. I was pretty disappointed. And what he did was he outright told one of his audience members to take out her phone. He was coaching her on relationship matters, and he said, take out your phone. He pretty much commanded her to take out her phone, call her boyfriend, and break up with him right there and then on the spot in front of 2,500 people, not to mention a team of documentarians making this documentary, right? And I suddenly felt like I was no longer watching Tony Robbins, the greatest coach of all time, but it was like I was watching a Jerry Springer rerun. Not that I watched that or anything, but the point is that this really didn't sit well with me, because as a coach, and I know the coaches that I've worked with know very, very well this important concept, and that is the answers to all questions lie within. And what that really means is that we know as coaches, and I'm sure that Tony knows this too, is that it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of the right questioning, of the right coaching, the right conversation, the right questions before a client arrives at the right answers to any dilemma, to any decision point, to any challenge, any big decision that you're coming across. And that's the part that's really important about that, is that it's the client, right? In this case, his audience members, that need to come up with that action step, not the coach, right? It really needs to come from within. So maybe in this case, the woman that Tony was coaching, sure, needed, to actually break up with her boyfriend, and maybe she needed that push, but the arriving at that step should have really come from her, not from being pushed by Tony towards that action. So anyway, it really got me thinking a lot about the importance of not allowing outside voices, whether it be people or circumstances, to be the dictators of our actions. Rather, especially when it comes to a big life decision, a breakup, a move, a career change, right? These decisions really need to come from the inside. They need to come from within. And that's because we already know ourselves the best, right? We've walked in our shoes. We've lived our experiences. We are our best guru. There's no one else that's better equipped to design that next step for you than you. And certainly advice is great, and certainly a coach is great to be able to arrive at that. But it's really important that those big decisions, those actions come from within. And in order to do that, what's really important is that you learn to listen to yourself and that you connect so intimately to that inner wisdom and that voice that is inside of you so you can start to trust that voice that is speaking to you. I like I shared in my last week's video, I recently went through a really, really big change of my own, which was to leave after 9 years, almost 9 years. I left my very secure, wonderful corporate job. And I left a career, really much my entire adult career I've spent in the corporate world. And so I left the world that I knew. I left my work family. I left the things that were comfortable. Um, I decided to leave that safety net, and no one made me do that, fortunately. Nobody told me to do that but myself. Yes, I absolutely asked other people for advice, like my husband, my family, but ultimately the decision was driven by me. And I arrived at that decision by listening to me. And certainly making a decision of this magnitude, especially during a pandemic, as we're going through right now, it was not easy. And it required a tremendous amount of uncomfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable listening to myself in order for me to really start to building trust. And in order to build trust with yourself, you got to listen, and you've got to start to identify why it is that you're listening, what you're hearing. So today I want to share a little bit about what that experience was like, and what really made the difference in allowing me to connect to that inner wisdom, and ultimately landed me to where I am today, building an entrepreneurial journey for myself as a coach. So simply put, what I did that was different was I went from being a passive to an active listener of myself, or to myself. And there's a big, big distinction here. As you've probably learned, there's lots of training on what it means to be an active listener. It's so important. Passive listening is very much a one-way street, where the receiving end isn't necessarily providing feedback or acknowledging the sender's message. And it's kind of like when my husband is talking to me and, I might be on Facebook or a little bit distracted, and I'll just say like, And it amazes me every time that I do that. And it's not a good thing, but it amazes me how easily his message goes in one ear and out the other, and how I just did not capture at all what he said. I went for many years of being that passive listener to myself, right? I would go through life hearing things, sensing, having certain sensations, for example, feeling anxiety or hearing that I wanted something more, and just really not listening. I remember one sign or one image that kept coming up for me, a visual, was I kept seeing this puzzle that had this puzzle piece that just didn't quite fit. Just no matter how much I tried, it didn't quite fit. And despite this very strong visual that I was having, and despite these feelings of like, something's not quite right, I mostly just went about my everyday life. I didn't really question why that visual kept coming up or what it meant. And it wasn't until I started my coach training journey that I learned different tools that allowed me to become much more of an active listener. And there were 3 tools in particular that really made that shift for me. And it's still a learning and growth journey. I'm not a perfect active listener to myself, but I'm working on that. But there are 3 tools that have helped. And those are 3 tools that I want to share with you today. Number 1 is to be okay and comfortable with being quiet, right? Sounds simple. Number 2, I learned how to ask powerful questions. And number 3, I learned how to acknowledge. So I want to talk a little bit about each one of those steps and how you can apply them. So let's start with number 1, which is being quiet. When you think about being an active listener, say you're in a conversation, right? You're having a conversation with someone, you're really engaged in the topic that's being discussed, you're engrossed, you're quiet, right? You're mostly quiet. If you're not, it's because you're asking questions, but you're really just listening to what the sender, what the communicator is saying, and think about how good it feels as the communicator when somebody is listening in that way, right? Their body language, even, their eyes are on you. And so it's pretty much the same way when we're thinking about how to listen to ourselves. It's really about being quiet and really having that curious mindset while we're listening. And that might look like, when we're thinking about being quiet to listen to ourselves, it might look like prayer for some of us. It might look like meditation. It might look like taking a walk. That was actually the one difference, or the one different thing that I started doing very recently, as I was leading up to making this decision, is I started to take morning walks very often by myself. I would take, well, other than my dogs, right? I would take them on walks, and I wouldn't have music on. I would just be quiet. And sometimes I would have a lot of thoughts, and sometimes there was nothing, but it just allowed me to start practicing this idea of being silent, right? I also started to write. As I was spending those moments of quiet, I started to write a little bit more, sometimes very eloquently, mostly not very eloquently, just really just jotting down thoughts, ideas that were coming to mind. And that practice really allowed me to start to get a little bit more in tune with myself, and a little bit more comfortable with taking a pause and not just going through my everyday without these moments of really important reflection. So that's number one, starting to learn and be okay, getting comfortable with being quiet is really important. Number two is asking powerful questions. And when I say powerful, a powerful question is very different from a yes or no question, right? Powerful questions are open-ended, and they really come from a place of genuine curiosity, right? Just like as when you're having a conversation with someone, you're really curious. Be curious with yourself. Ask empowering questions that are not close-ended questions. For example, instead of asking yourself, am I feeling anxious? Yes. Okay. That doesn't really give us much, right? It's much more powerful to ask, what is it that you're doing that is causing anxiety? Or it can be a happy question too. It can be, what is it that you're doing that when you feel that time is just flying by and you feel so joyful and so engaged? So some questions that I was asking myself as I was going through this big career decision were, what am I doing? What about what I'm doing today is not fully meeting my needs? Another one was, what about being a coach fully excites me? So I was asking questions about the present. I was also imagining the future and asking questions about what that future could look like. Other questions were, what might that new career look like? One really important one that actually my coach asked me was, what is it going to cost you to not go for your dreams? And boom, like that was such a big life-changing question for me, because it made me think about, what is it going to cost me to not invest my time and energy in what I really love to do. And on that note, working with a coach, like myself or another coach, is where we're asking these powerful questions can be even more powerful, right? Like we can ask ourselves certain questions, and we know certain questions to ask, but sometimes it really helps to work with somebody else that is not in the box with you, that can ask you questions that you wouldn't necessarily think, that really make you pause and really make you reflect. So that's number two. Ask powerful questions. Number three is really all about acknowledging. This is a really simple coaching tool that you can use with yourself. It's a tool that coaches use a lot to diffuse tension, to normalize feelings, to create some empathy. And it goes like this. When you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling angry, sad, overwhelmed, whatever the emotion is that is coming up for you, listen to that feeling and name that feeling, right? Again, it might be anxiety, it might be sadness, it might be happiness, it might be whatever it is. And then say Carla, or say your name. It makes complete sense that you're feeling blank, you're feeling anxiety, for example, given that you blank. For example, it makes complete sense, Carla, it makes complete sense that you're feeling overwhelmed given that you haven't had a moment to yourself all week, right? Really simple. Right there, acknowledging the feeling of overwhelm releases some of that tension that this feeling of overwhelm creates. And not only does it release tension, but it starts to create some awareness, some connection with the feeling and the why, right? So it's not just, it makes sense that you're overwhelmed, but attached to it, it makes sense that you're overwhelmed given that whatever the reason is. So that's a tool that I've used a lot, that I try to use with myself. It really just makes me feel better, to say it makes complete sense that you're feeling this way, given that you, whatever, right? So those are the three tools that I've used over and over, and have practiced and gotten more comfortable with over the last few months as I've looked to become a lot more in touch with that inner voice, and really get comfortable with and trusting with what that voice is telling me, in leading up to the big decision that I made to leave my job and launch my career, as a full-time coach. So again, those were, be quiet. I don't mean that in a bad way. Just like get comfortable with being quiet. It's okay to have a few moments of quiet if you can, as much as you can. Number two, ask powerful questions, not close-ended, but open-ended, curious-led questions. And number three, acknowledge what you're sensing, what you're feeling. So I hope that those techniques are helpful for you. So ultimately, you can be in the driver's seat of the decisions and actions that you're taking, and not someone like Tony Robbins or somebody else, but really you, by listening from within, because ultimately the answers to all dilemmas, all questions, all challenges, come from within. So thank you so much for joining me. This is, an exciting launch, this series of Thriving Thursdays. I'm excited to continue engaging with you over the course of the next few weeks. I will see you next week. Bye.